Hello again to my friends, and a special hello to the new subscribers since the last video. We're growing slowly, but we are growing day by day. I am the truth-seeking atheist. Now, this is not just a silly name that I chose. I really mean it. The reason why I left Christianity was because I found the truth. And I often tell my Christian friends, I could very easily be taken back into the flock. All it takes is for you to show some evidence of the truth of what you're proclaiming. Now, in seeking the truth, I very often watch a lot of videos by Christian apologists, Christian pastors, because if there is truth out there, I would like to know it. If there's any truth to the proposition that God exists, any gods exist, in what form they exist, where they exist, how, I would like to know it. So I'm constantly looking for facts that Christian apologists have got to put forward. Now, one of those that I've watched recently was a video by Mike Winger. He's a Christian apologist and a pastor. His video was titled, "A Bunch of Reasons the Empty Tomb is Historical." Now, Mike is a very friendly guy. He comes across very well. He puts across his points clearly. He seems like a very nice guy. It's nice to watch him, and I'm going to link this video in the description below.
In today's live stream, I'm going to give you 14 reasons why you should believe that the empty tomb is a real historical event, that Jesus, he not only died under being crucified under Pontius Pilate, but that he was buried, and then 3 days later that tomb was found empty by eyewitnesses.
After watching this video, I couldn't not do a video in answer. There was too much that just didn't sit well with me. Now, he says it's 14 reasons. It turned out to be 12. And even that, I think, was too much. There were some that didn't fit, weren't meant to be there, but we'll deal with them in time. All right, so the first reason he gives is multiple attestation. This is something I have heard a lot, constantly, from all these apologists. Multiple attestation, independent attestation. And what is the attestation? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Corinthians, other Bible verses. And I always ask myself, if you want me to take this seriously, why should I care what the Bible says? And I mean this sincerely. Why should I care? Is there something in the Bible that makes it truthful or good or anything worth taking note of? First, I'd like to address the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So these books, we don't know who wrote them. The authors are anonymous. They're written at different times by different people for different audiences. Now, the Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called the Synoptic Gospels because they're meant to be read together. They tell the same stories, but the problem is they often contradict. They often have problems harmonizing. And I find this is something that is very hard to overcome. It's hard to take one story seriously when there's a conflicting one somewhere else. A very good example that I brought up before is who is Jesus' grandfather. In one account, it is Heli, Joseph's father is Heli, and in another account, Joseph's father is Jacob. Which one is it? Clearly, they have constructed storylines to try and make it fit because Jesus had to come from the line of David. But now, having said that these Gospels tell different stories, we at the same time have a different problem. And this problem is very often the Gospels have copied from one another. If you take, for example, the story of Jesus healing the leper, read the story in Matthew 8, verses 2 to 3, Mark 1, verses 40 to 42, and Luke 5, verses 12 to 13. Very often, the writings, the scriptures are verbatim. Exactly what the one person wrote, the other person wrote. So what's the chances of two people, two eyewitnesses, telling the same story exactly in the same words. They were copied. To me, if they're copied, they're not independent. And if they're not independent, they don't qualify as multiple attestation. It's one attestation being told in different voices. The second reason Mike brings up is the early attestation. That these accounts were documented very early in the course of history. We know Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John was written very long afterwards, a good 50 years, 40, 50 years after the death of Jesus. That is not early attestation, that is a long time. But they very often cite 1 Corinthians 15 as Paul putting forward a previous creed. Now, at some point, I want to do a video about 1 Corinthians 15. But for now, I want to say just because it's early doesn't make it true. We need more than just Paul's word for it. Paul has been shown to be wrong. I would go so far as dishonest from time to time. But for now, I would like to say, let's just say we cannot ascertain that it's true just because it's early.
German theologian Walter Casper even asserts that here's Habermas quoting Casper, we have here, therefore, an ancient text, perhaps in use by the end of 30 AD.
I found it really interesting how Gary Habermas quotes Walter Casper, this Catholic cardinal, as putting the creed at the end of 30 AD. Jesus was crucified between 30 and 33 AD. So this could put the creed before the death of Jesus. Alright, so the third reason put forward is lack of embellishment. Apologists very often like to say just because a story isn't embellished, it makes it true, it gives it authenticity. And as an example of this, he cites the Apocalypse of Peter, which is not in the current canon, and I'm going to read it to you. It comes from verses 35 to 42 of the Apocalypse of Peter. But in the night in which the Lord's day dawned, when the soldiers were safeguarding it 2 by 2 in every watch, there was a loud voice in heaven. And they saw that the heavens were opened, and that 2 males who had much radiance had come down from there and come near the sepulchre. But that stone which had been thrust against the door, having rolled by itself, went a distance off the side, and the sepulchre opened, and both the young men entered. And so those soldiers, having seen, awakened the centurion and the elders, for they too were present, safeguarding. And while they were relating what they had seen, again they see 3 males who have come out of the sepulchre, with the 2 supporting the other one, and a cross following them, and the head of the 2 reaching unto heaven, but that of the one being led up by a hand by them going beyond the heavens. And they were hearing a voice from the heavens saying, Have you made proclamation to the fallen asleep? And the obeisance was heard from the cross. Yes. Alright, so essentially in the Gospel of Peter, 2 angels come down, they go into they roll the stone away magically, they go into the burial tomb, they bring out Jesus, who is now hundreds of feet tall, his head touches the sky, and out behind them follows the cross, which is even larger. And a voice from heaven says, Have you spoken to those who have already died? Have you preached to them? And the cross answers yes. So clearly this can't be true, because it is heavily embellished. You don't get Jesus hundreds of feet tall and a talking cross coming out of the tomb. But does that make the rest of the stories, the other stories, any more reliable?
So the cross itself audibly speaks. This is what you call legendary development.
I know, the irony didn't escape me. If the embellishment of a talking cross is considered unbelievable, what about a talking snake? A talking donkey? How about a talking burning bush? Is that any more believable? Are those stories embellished? Now, Mike is very quick to point out that those were Gnostics that wrote this book. They weren't Christians. There was nothing realistic about what they wrote. They were just Gnostics. They were as good as pagans in his view. Bear in mind, the Apocalypse of Peter from Clement of Alexandria, one of the church fathers, considered it to be holy scripture. And in the Muratorian fragment, which is considered to be the earliest list of New Testament canon, that included the Apocalypse of Peter. So I'm not sure about the story is not embellished. A stone rolling away magically or miraculously, a body miraculously disappearing or magically. Anything miraculous is embellishment. All right, so Mike's fourth reason for believing in the reasons for the empty tomb is enemy attestation. The idea behind this is if a story is included that doesn't go with the narrative you're trying to put forward, something contrary, that gives it credibility. So in Matthew 28:12, the guards are given money and told to tell the story that the body was stolen away by the disciples. Why would this be included? To Mike, it shows that there was an empty tomb because they had to explain away the loss of the body. To me, however, if I was writing a fictional story similar to this one, this would be considered a loose end. You have these guards who are watching over the tomb. Their job is to protect the tomb, to guard it. Roman soldiers don't just fall asleep. That was a death sentence for them. They would have stayed awake, they would have been alert, and if a stone that large had been rolled away, they would have noticed it. So for them to suddenly in the morning report that the body was gone, the stone was rolled away and the body was gone, this is a loose end that an author of a fictional story would have to tie up. And a good way to do that would be to say the guards were paid to say that the body was stolen away by the disciples. All right, then Mike also mentions in Justin Martyr's dialogue with Trypho in section 108, he mentions the empty tomb and the body being stolen away by the disciples. He also mentions Tertullian in section 30, mentioning something similar. All right, I don't care. Both Justin Martyr and Tertullian lived 100 years later. They were both devout Christians. They were church fathers and apologists. And the fifth reason, there were no competing traditions at the time. Why not? As far as I can make out, it wasn't important enough. Why would there be a competing tradition against a story that didn't carry any weight? There was no reason to believe it was true in the first place. Now the sixth reason is the one that gets everybody all excited. The women were the ones to find the empty tomb. Why would women find an empty tomb? It is, women were chattel. They were possessions to be owned. They had no rights. Nobody took them seriously. For them to come forward and say that they found the empty tomb means nothing. The conclusion to be drawn from this is that because the women found the empty tomb, it must be true. Once again, if I was writing a story, a fictional story like this, I would use women. It makes it more realistic. Superman has his krypton. You cannot have this all-powerful guy that had nothing that can stop him. Superman has krypton. The Jesus story has the women. It lends credibility to the story. If I was a decent author, I would use it. I would put it in because it makes it more believable. Another one of the reasons that Mike brings forward that the women are untrustworthy as witnesses comes from the Mishnah, from Rosh Hashanah, chapter 1, verse 8, where it says that unfit witnesses include gamblers with dice, people who loan money with interest, pigeon racers, people who trade in produce on the sabbatical year, slaves, and women. All right, now, what about gamblers who play with cards, not dice? Do they count? What's wrong with pigeon racers? People bet on pigeons, but you can bet on snails running across the pavement. You can bet on rainwater falling down a window. You can bet on anything. What makes pigeon racers unfit witnesses? Okay, so the seventh reason is that the places of burial, the places of the grave sites of spiritual leaders were noted, were identified. This was one of the 12 that I feel had no place in there. So what? People knew where people were buried. I know where lots of people are buried. Doesn't matter. Doesn't make the story any more real. It just means that the people at the time knew where important figures were buried. Alright, so the eighth reason was that because the story came from Jerusalem, it had to be true, because the thinking is that if the story was being told about a different country, somewhere else, where nothing could be verified, it would be easier to tell a lie. But because it happened in and around Jerusalem, people could be questioned, events could be checked out. The whole credibility could be verified. Ordinarily, this wouldn't be a problem for me, but except for one thing, and this is the one thing that I always bring forward when it comes to extra biblical sources for Jesus. There was one man, a historian, a Jewish Roman historian, who was born before the time of Jesus. He died after Jesus. He lived almost his entire life in or around Jerusalem. I don't have it on me, but if I remember right, his nephew was married to Herod Agrippa's daughter. This historian documented everything meticulously regarding the Jews. He was fantastic as a historian. This man's name was Philo of Alexandria. Do you know how much Philo wrote about the life and times of Jesus, about his walking on water, turning water into wine, feeding the multitudes, healing the sick, raising the dead, being crucified, resurrected? He wrote nothing, not one word. So a prominent figure from the area didn't notice Jesus. Well, then the story coming from Jerusalem doesn't carry any weight either. All right, now the ninth one is one of my favorites, Joseph of Arimathea. All right, so firstly he says that Joseph of Arimathea is multiply attested in Mark and John. But as we've dealt with already, this is not multiple attestation. It is single Christian source attestation. All right, so for me the bigger issue is, did Joseph of Arimathea actually exist? This is something that I've been looking into for quite a while now, and I'm not sure. There seems to be enough argument against. The first one is, where is Aramathea? There's been many places that people have said this is what used to be Aramathea. Amongst them are Ramah, Armathaim, Zophim, Ramle, Rantis, and Ramallah. Now, these aren't the same places, they're different places, but they are all said to be Aramathea. Now, there's no extra biblical mention of Aramathea anywhere, so we don't know where it is, if it ever was. Also, if you look at the word Aramathea, Mathea means disciple town, and Ari is a prefix which denotes superlative. So it comes down to the best disciple town, which may or may not be accurate, but it is worth taking a look at. Is that where the name was derived from? All right, so another point to bring up is that nowhere extra biblically that I've found or that I've heard of from anybody else does Joseph of Arimathea or Aramathea the town exist anywhere. And my last point on the subject for now is that, and it may not be a big one, but it's worth mentioning, the Sanhedrin unanimously convicted Jesus, and Joseph was a member of the Sanhedrin. So he, at the same time, on the same day, both convicted Jesus and asked for him to be, the body to be returned to him because he was a secret disciple. This doesn't sit well. I know I said that was the last one, but there is another thing to bring up about Joseph of Arimathea. Jesus died between 3 and 4 p.m., which is what they call the 9th hour. And this you can find in Matthew 27:46. And he had to be buried by 6 p.m. When the Sabbath starts. This and Deuteronomy 21 verses 20-23 says that a Jew cannot be left hanging on a pole overnight. So between 3 and 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. So we're looking at 2.5, maybe 3 hours. Joseph of Arimathea had to ask Pilate's permission to get Jesus' body. Pilate had to send a Roman soldier to go and stick the spear in Jesus' side to make sure that he was dead. Then Joseph had to go with Nicodemus to buy clean linen and anointing oils, take the body down, carry it to the grave, anoint it and wrap it. Was there enough time? Another small but maybe not so insignificant point is that a Jew would not be able to handle a dead body before Passover without becoming unclean. And they wouldn't want to go into Passover unclean. So a Jew would not handle a dead body. Alright, so if you're going to believe the story of Joseph of Arimathea that's been told so far, you might as well believe the rest of it. So what happens now is Joseph, after the story of Jesus' resurrection, Joseph is imprisoned and thrown into a dungeon where Jesus appears to him in the dungeon, gives him the Holy Grail, the cup, the Last Supper cup, which is now filled with the blood from his side, from his wound, from the spear. Joseph magically, miraculously escapes the dungeon without breaking the seal on the door, and he escapes with his family to Glastonbury, England, with the cup and a staff that he's carrying. He gets to England and he climbs this hill and he's tired and he plants his staff in the ground and he falls asleep, and while he's sleeping the staff turns into a massive thorn tree. The Holy Grail then stays in England, where King Arthur and his knights go looking for it. And the story gets entwined with Joseph of Arimathea and the legend of King Arthur gets entwined and told in various different ways. So at what point does the truth end and legend takes over? Or is it all true? Or is it all legend? I found one more thing to be very interesting. And it is something in the writings of Flavius Josephus. In his work, The Life of Flavius Josephus, section 75. I saw many captives crucified and remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintance. I was very sorry at this in my mind and went with tears in my eyes to Titus and told him of them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down and to have the greatest care taken of them in order to their recovery. Yet 2 of them died under the physician's hands, while the 3rd recovered. Alright, so Josephus has 3 of his friends hanging on crosses. And he goes to Titus and asks them if they can be taken down. Titus agrees, 2 of them die and 1 of them survives. Doesn't this story sound familiar? 3 people hanging on crosses. Joseph goes and asks Pilate if he can have 1 of them off the cross. Pilate agrees. 2 of them die. The 1 eventually survives, or lives eventually. The parallels are way too close to put up as pure coincidence. Alright, so Mike's 10th reason that the empty tomb is legitimate has to do with the description of the tomb. Now what he says is that the description of the various types of tombs and the way they are used is very accurate for the time. So what? It was written at the time for the people of the time who knew what was happening at the time. It would be more surprising to find an inaccurate description. It would be more surprising if people today, 2,000 years later, were trying to describe Jesus' tomb and got it right. But for an author at the time to be describing situations at the time, nothing significant there. All right, so Mike's 11th reason, and now we're really scraping the barrel. The day of the burial is the day of preparation. What he's essentially saying here is that the different accounts in Mark 15:46, Luke 23:54, and John 19:31 are telling the same story. What he's saying is that they are multiple independent sources relaying the same narrative. Once again, not multiple independent attestations, one Christian attestation. And secondly, I'm not really convinced that this reason has anything to do with the empty tomb as such. This reasoning could fall into many different categories, could be describing many different things. And the 12th reason, the women observing the burial shows historicity. What he's pointing to here is that the women in Mark 15:40 observe the crucifixion, the women in Mark 15:47 observe the burial, and the women in Mark 16 verse 1 find the empty tomb. So what? We've been over the women as sources. The fact that they witnessed all these things, not surprising, it follows the story. We've already discussed the role of women as witnesses, and this reason would carry the same weight if men saw the crucifixion, if men saw the burial, if men came to the empty tomb. Okay, so I have a couple of other issues with the tomb that I would like to raise aside from the things in Mike's video. The first one is the tomb was heavily guarded by professional soldiers who were there to make sure that the stone wasn't tampered with. None of them saw it roll away. The second thing is that in Mark 15:46, as Joseph rolled the stone into position. Now, these stones would traditionally be between 4 and 6 feet in diameter and weigh between 1 and 2 tons. What I found is that they said that most of these things, the ground sloped slightly and there was a little indentation in the ground that the stone would fit into. So it was fairly simple to roll the stone into position. It is a slight downhill, and it wouldn't take too much effort. 2 people could probably do it with a fair amount of ease. 1 person, maybe not. Would Josephus been able to push it into position by himself? I don't know. What I do know is that Jesus couldn't have rolled the stone away by himself. This would have to be done by magic, by miracles. Another issue that I want to bring up is on the day that the ladies found the tomb empty, they were coming to anoint Jesus' body. How were they planning on getting that stone rolled away? It would take a stone that size, rolling slightly uphill out of an indentation carved into the floor, would take several men pushing heavily to get that stone to move. How are these women planning on doing it? Unless they were going to ask the soldiers to help. And just getting back to the stone rolling away for a moment, even if these soldiers had been sleeping, a 1 to 2 ton stone rolling across the ground would make a fair amount of noise. Even a sleeping person would have heard it, would have woken up from that sound. Unless it was rolled away silently by magic or miracle. So, was there an empty tomb? I don't know. But I have found there are enough questions raised to make me doubt, to make me question it. And again, this is why I call myself a truth-seeking atheist. I would like to know the truth. Answer these questions for me, and that'll help me along my journey. Now, having said this, I'm going to be doing a series of videos about Gary Habermas's minimal facts. I would like to address each one of them separately. The empty tomb is one of them, and this is probably either going to be it, or I'll do a different version of this one when I do the series. So I'm quite looking forward to those. If you'd like to see more, please join us, subscribe, hit the little bell icon. If you have already subscribed, share this video with a friend. Let's see what they think about it, what comments they have on it. I would love to get more information. As always, it's been awesome speaking to you, and I can't wait to speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.